Okay, so let's dive in. We're unpacking this really fascinating idea today. The concept that maybe, just maybe, some of the issues you're grappling with, well, they didn't actually start with you.
Exactly. We're talking about those persistent anxieties, right? Or the
Yeah.
relationship patterns that seem to repeat no matter what you do.
Yeah, and that feeling sometimes deep down, like, why do I react this way? Why does this feel so big when, you know, objectively, maybe the situation doesn't warrant this level of internal chaos?
And that's where this deep dive takes us. We're looking into how these, well, emotional and even physiological legacies might be carried down, not just from our own life experiences, but maybe from unresolved stuff further back in the family line.
It sounds a bit out there initially, but the science is actually starting to connect the dots.
It really is. What's so compelling is how the different sources we looked at from core trauma research, attachment theory, even psychoanalysis, they all point towards these complex integrated systems.
Systems involving
Yeah.
what? Like mind and body.
Both neurological systems, physiological ones, and definitely our relational patterns. They offer a pretty concrete basis for why you might feel this sense of inherited stress.
So our mission today is to kind of distill all that. We want to explain not just what these patterns look like, but maybe get into the why they feel so fundamental, so baked into your survival instinct,
Yeah.
even when they're causing pain or holding you back.
Exactly. We're aiming to give you a bit of a shortcut to understanding the mechanisms. We'll touch on the neurophysiology, things like polyvagal theory, the trauma response.
Right, the body stuff.
Yeah, and then connect that to the psychological side, attachment theory, how we model behavior early on.
Basically connecting those like ancient fear responses lodged deep down in the body to the ways we relate to people today, the self-talk, that inner critic. And crucially, we want to explore pathways towards, well, genuine healing and maybe changing that script.
Yeah, finding ways to actually shift these deep-seated patterns.
Okay, so when we talk about these inherited patterns, it's tempting to jump straight to the mind, to psychology. But the research really pushes us to start with the body.
Absolutely, it's foundational. One of the core concepts in modern trauma understanding is this. Traumatic symptoms aren't caused directly by the scary event itself.
Right. That's counterintuitive for a lot of people. So what causes them then?
It's what the sources call the frozen residue of energy. Think about it. When you face a threat, any mammal, really your system instantly mobilizes a huge amount of energy. Fight, flight, or even freezing.
Preparing for action, basically.
Exactly,
Yeah.
preparing to survive. But if, for whatever reason, the system can't complete that action, can't resolve or discharge that massive energy load, if the defensive response gets cut short,
It gets stuck.
they get stuck, trapped. That highly charged energy remains lodged in the nervous system. It hasn't gone anywhere.
So we're not just talking about bad memories or emotional scars here. This is like actual physical energy that's still on.
Precisely, it's physiological. And the long-term symptoms of PTSD, chronic anxiety, maybe even some physical issues they often develop because the body couldn't fully move in to the threat response, through it, and then critically out of that state, especially the immobility or freeze response.
Can you give us an example? Like, how does that feel?
Well, the sources use this vivid image.
Uh-huh.
Think of an impala chased by a lion. Its nervous system is floored, right? Charged up maybe 70 miles an hour internally.
Okay. Full throttle.
Full throttle. Now, if it gets caught, it might go into that death-feigning freeze, looks completely still on the outside. But inside, that engine is still roaring at 70 miles an hour, desperate for release for the chance to escape if the predator looks away for a second.
Wow. So externally mobile, but internally.
Yeah.
Pure chaos.
Exactly. You've got this intense inner racing, the charged nervous system
It's the accelerator jammed down.
slamming up against the body's brake, which is the total immobility, and that massive internal conflict, that clash.
What does that create?
The research describes it like a forceful, turbulent tornado inside the body, just churning. That internal tornado, fueled by all that undischarged survival energy, that's the physical residue. That forms the bedrock of chronic traumatic stress symptoms.
So the body is basically stuck in threat mode, even years later.
Yeah.
Constantly scanning, even if the original danger is long gone.
Yes. And here's the potential link to inheritance. If a parent remains stuck in that highly charged, unresolved state, that internal environment, that physiological pattern, well, that can potentially be transmitted. The child grows up marinated in that stress physiology.
Okay, hold on. If the trauma is literally frozen energy, like a physical tornado inside, that implies just talking about it, understanding it intellectually, might not be enough to resolve it.
That's a huge implication. And yes, that's why so much of the literature, especially around trauma, emphasizes somatic approaches, body-based work.
Because you can understand why you're anxious all day long.
Right. Cognitively, you get it. But if your nervous system's brake pedal is still slammed down while the gas is on full, the body's just going to keep generating those symptoms. That failure to discharge is what cements the chronic symptoms, the ones that often feel so baffling and resistant to just, thinking your way out.
That makes sense. And it leads us straight into how our nervous system is actually built to handle this stuff, the built-in hierarchy.
The polyvagal hierarchy, yes.
Yeah.
This is like the inherited defensive blueprint we all carry. Our mammalian nervous system didn't just evolve one way to react. It evolved 3 distinct neural circuits.
The circuits.
Yep. And they're organized hierarchically based on evolution, phylogenetically, meaning the newest, most sophisticated circuit sits on top, and if it can't handle things, we drop down to the older, more primitive ones.
Okay, let's break that down. The newest one first, the top level.
Right. The newest, most advanced circuit is what allows for social connection. It's called the social engagement system. This is regulated by a specific part of the vagus nerve, the myelinated part, sometimes called the ventral vagal complex.
Ventral vagal.
Okay.
And that's our safe and social state.
That's our default when we feel safe. When the system is online, we feel calm, we're open to connection, we can communicate clearly, read facial expressions, hear vocal tone properly, we're available for interaction.
What's so special about how the system works, physiologically?
It's actually pretty amazing. Evolutionarily, it created this link. It connects the neural regulation of the heart directly with the muscles of the face, the head, the neck.
So heart and face are linked. How does that help socially?
Think about it. It means your facial expressions, the tone of your voice, even how you listen and tilt your head. All of that is neurologically coordinated with your heart rate, your breathing, your overall physiological state. It allows us to sync up with others, to co-regulate. It's literally the biological wiring for feeling safe with others.
Wow. Okay. But here's the crucial part, right? Especially thinking about inherited stress or trauma.
Here's the kicker, yes. Social behavior, connecting, communicating calmly, empathizing, is neurophysiologically incompatible with the states created by the older defense systems.
Meaning?
Meaning, if your social engagement system, that newest circuit, fails to detect safety, or if their perceived threat is too high, it essentially shuts down, it goes offline. Your ability to connect drops away.
And then what happens?
Then the older circuits get recruited, sequentially. First, usually the fight-or-flight system kicks in mobilization, adrenaline, cortisol. If that doesn't work or isn't possible, the system can drop down further to the most primitive circuit.
Which is?
The unmyelinated vagus. This triggers shutdown, dissociation, collapse, that death-feigning freeze we talked about with the impala. It's a deeply ingrained biological hierarchy of response. You don't choose it. Your nervous system runs the program based on perceived threat level.
And if someone grows up in an environment where that threat level is chronically high, maybe due to a parent's unresolved trauma,
then their system learns to rely on those older defensive circuits much more readily. They might live in a state of hypervigilance, fight, flight, or hypoarousal, free shutdown, even when things are currently safe. The body is constantly braced, constantly expecting danger.
it's stuck on those lower rungs of the ladder.
Stuck is a good word for it. And when humans get stuck in that high-energy charged state but can't fight or flee, they often fail to discharge that energy completely. Culture, interestingly, kind of nudges us towards a particular way of managing this excess charge.
A way that might not be healthy.
Often not, no. It encourages internalizing it. The sources call this acting in.
Acting in, as opposed to acting out.
Precisely. Acting out would be, aggression, yelling, maybe physical violence, releasing the energy outwards. Acting in is turning that turbulent energy inward against the self.
Like what does acting in look like?
Oh, it can manifest in many ways. Chronic perfectionism, maybe. Intense self-criticism, self-sabotage, sometimes self-isolation, or even unexplained physical symptoms. Chronic pain, digestive issues, autoimmune stuff. These can be ways the system tries to contain or manage that powerful, undischarged survival energy.
So it looks calmer on the surface than acting out.
Exactly, which is why it's often more socially acceptable. But internally, that person is still wrestling with that inner tornado. It's a kind of violence against the self, and it's incredibly draining and unsustainable long term. It corrodes well-being from the inside out.
Okay, so the body's holding this charge, this maybe inherited energetic residue. Let's shift now to the mind. What kind of psychological structures does the mind build to try and cope with that internal tornado?
Well, a huge piece of this, especially relevant to inherited patterns, is how our sense of self, our identity, gets shaped, particularly the development of the internal critic and our experience of guilt.
The inner critic, that voice that tells you you're not good enough.
That's the one. And the sources, particularly from psychoanalysis, suggest that our sense of guilt, our conscience, comes partly from internalizing aggression.
Internalizing aggression, how does that work?
It's linked to the fear of losing love or approval, especially from those powerful figures we depend on early in life, usually parents. When they set limits or express disapproval, the child feels aggression towards that external authority stopping them. But expressing that aggression directly often feels too risky.
Because you might lose their love or support.
Exactly. So that aggressive energy gets turned inward. It becomes part of this internal structure, sometimes called the superego. This internalized authority monitors you, judges you, enforces rules.
And Freud noted, didn't he, that this superego can actually become really harsh, almost cruel even, showing very little concern for the actual person's happiness.
Yes, it can be overly severe. It's like that original anger towards the parent saying no gets weaponized against the self. It becomes this relentless internal judge.
And this whole process starts incredibly early, right? Like infancy.
Oh, absolutely. If you look at Erikson's psychosocial stages, the very first developmental task is establishing what he called basic trust versus basic mistrust. And what determines whether you develop trust or mistrust isn't just about getting your basic needs met, like food and shelter.
It's more subtle than that.
Much more. It's about the quality of the relationship, primarily with the mother or primary caregiver. Does the care feel sensitive, attuned, reliable? Is there a sense of trustworthiness?
Okay, quality of care. Makes sense.
But here's a really striking point from the sources, connecting directly back to these inherited burdens. Children don't necessarily become neurotic just from frustration or having limits set.
Now, what's more damaging then?
It's the lack or loss of societal meaning in those frustrations. It's when the suffering, the limits, the emotional upsets feel arbitrary, chaotic, meaningless.
Wow. Can you unpack that? Lack of meaning.
If the parents themselves are struggling, maybe carrying their own unresolved trauma or anxieties, they might not be able to provide a stable, meaningful context for the child's experiences. They can't convey that deep, almost bodily conviction that there's a reason behind the rules, that challenges can be navigated, that the world basically makes sense.
So if the parent is internally chaotic or overwhelmed,
the child absorbs that chaos. Their world feels unpredictable, the frustrations don't seem to lead anywhere constructive, and the internal authority, the superego that develops in that environment, can become really punitive and disorganized because it never learned a coherent, meaningful script. The child essentially inherits the parent's lack of internal coherence.
like that idea of meaning, or the lack of it, feels like it connects to some of Adler's work too, right? How feelings of inadequacy can shape us.
Very much so. Adler talked a lot about feelings of inferiority. He saw them as pretty universal, actually. I mean, as kids, we are objectively smaller and less capable than the adults around us. Or maybe there were specific challenges in childhood.
So feeling inferior sometimes is normal.
He thought so. The problem isn't the feeling itself. It's what happens when that feeling becomes overwhelming, when it solidifies into an inferiority complex.
When does that happen? When does it become a complex?
According to Adler, it happens when individuals feel so fundamentally weak or inadequate that they disengage from what he called the useful side of life, things like social contribution, cooperation. They stop being interested in the collective good.
And
Instead, they start striving intensely for personal superiority, for power over others, purely as a compensation for that deep-seated feeling of being less than.
So the superiority complex we sometimes joke about.
In Adler's view, it's no joke. It's a direct cover-up. It's a psychological defense mechanism masking a profound, often unconscious inferiority complex. This person is desperately trying to arrange their life to avoid any possibility of feeling that core humiliation ever again.
So their drive for power, for prestige, is coming from fear.
Deep fear, yes, fear of inadequacy. Their whole way of being becomes about anticipating threats to their status, ensuring they come out on top. It's a constant, anxious striving that's ultimately rooted in that early feeling of being fundamentally not good enough, a feeling that could very well have roots in those early family dynamics and inherited scripts.
Okay, so we have the internal structures, the critic, the inferiority feelings. Yeah. How do these inherited blueprints then play out in our actual relationships? This seems like prime territory for attachment theory.
Absolutely. Attachment styles, typically categorized as secure, anxious, and avoidant, are essentially these ingrained working models of relationship.
Right.
They dictate how we tend to behave, what we expect, what we fear in intimate situations.
And they often act like self-fulfilling prophecies, right? Getting in the way of the very connection we might crave.
They really can. Let's look at the two insecure styles because they show the inherited drama so clearly. Take the anxious style. People with this style typically crave deep intimacy, closeness, connection. But they're also hypersensitive to any perceived threat to that closeness. A text message that takes too long to arrive, a slight shift in tone of voice, a partner needing space.
These feel like major alarms to them.
Huge alarms. They get flooded with anxiety, fear of abandonment, but often they haven't learned healthy ways to communicate that distress, that need for reassurance.
So what do they do instead?
They might resort to what the research calls protest behavior or acting out, maybe becoming demanding, maybe withdrawing angrily, maybe creating drama. Not because they want to be dramatic, but because it's their only known way to try and signal their distress and pull the partner back in.
It's like they're desperately trying to communicate a real need.
A totally legitimate need for intimacy, availability, security.
But the way they communicate it often pushes the partner away.
Exactly. It creates this painful feedback loop. And it's so important, as you said, that the research validates their needs. They aren't just being needy in a pathological sense. They're often expressing a deep-seated, perhaps inherited anxiety about connection stemming from inconsistent early caregiving patterns.
Okay, now contrast that with the avoidance style. What's their pattern?
The avoidance style is almost the mirror image. They tend to suppress their emotional needs and value independence very highly, sometimes to the exclusion of genuine intimacy. When things start to feel too close, too vulnerable,
They pull back.
they pull back. They use deactivating strategies, like they might suddenly focus intensely on a partner's tiny flaw or rationalize why the relationship won't work or just declare they need space. It's all designed to create emotional distance and tamp down the discomfort that closeness brings up for them.
And they might not even realize they're doing it, right? They might genuinely believe the reasons they give.
Often, yes. The sources point out how good they can be at repressing their own needs for connection. They might say things like, "Oh, I just haven't met the right person yet," or "relationships always feel too demanding." They attribute the issues to external factors rather than looking at their own internal difficulty with vulnerability and interdependence.
It's like confusing self-reliance with genuine intimacy.
Very much so. They might seem quite open and engaging up to a point, but when true emotional depth is required, the drawbridge goes up.
So where does the secure style fit in? Is that the goal?
The secure style is really the model for healthy relating, and often the outcome of healing these other patterns. Secure folks are characterized by, well, growing closeness and intimacy in relationships. They can talk about their feelings, even difficult ones, with coherence and sensitivity.
And they don't play games.
Generally, no. There's a lack of manipulation or protest behavior. And here's a key difference in their internal script. If a partner treats them poorly or consistently pulls away.
They don't automatically blame themselves.
Right. They tend to see it as information about the partner's capacity or inability to be responsive and respectful, not as proof of their own unworthiness. This allows them to maintain self-respect and make healthier choices about the relationship, rather than getting sucked into that repetitive trauma loop of self-blame that the anxious or avoidant styles often perpetuate. It's like operating from a different, much less charged internal program.
Okay, we've sketched out the architecture, the body's potential freeze response, the mind's coping patterns like the critic or attachment styles. That's step one, understanding the what. But step two is recognition. How do we as individuals living this actually start to recognize that maybe this anxiety, this relationship dance, maybe it didn't originate entirely with us, especially when we're often pretty blind to our own patterns?
That self-blindness is a real hurdle. It's amazing how distorted our self-perception can be. We often genuinely think we're communicating more clearly or acting more calmly than we actually are. So the very first key step really is just noticing the repetition.
The recurring themes.
Yeah. The predictable, often painful patterns in your relationships. How do arguments typically start? What are the roles you and your partner tend to fall into? That feeling of, ugh, here we go again.
Noticing how you consistently, as the sources put it, tick each other off.
Exactly. And connecting that to your attachment style, really understanding, okay, I lean anxious or I lean avoidant, and seeing how that specific inherited working model shows up again and again, That's huge for just admitting, okay, there's some kind of invisible script running here that's messing things up.
And neuroscience actually gives us some clues about why recognition can be hard, especially if we're wired for anxiety, right? Something about the brain hemispheres.
Yes, there's fascinating research on this. It suggests a kind of functional split in the brain's hemispheres regarding how we process the world.
How so?
Broadly speaking, the right side of the cortex seems more involved in responding to threat, to novelty, to the unknown, potential punishment, things that require caution.
Okay, the danger scanner.
Sort of. While the left hemisphere seems more geared towards managing things we already know, tasks we feel competent in, situations that promise reward or stability, the familiar.
So how does this relate to recognizing inherited patterns, especially negative ones?
Well, people who are prone to chronic negativity, anxiety, pessimism, what the sources might call the alarmist profile, always anticipating disaster.
Yeah.
They often show more pronounced activity in those right frontal areas. It's like their brain is, perhaps through inheritance or early experience, biased towards threat detection. It's constantly scanning, constantly on alert, consuming a ton of energy.
Which makes it harder to feel safe, engage positively.
Exactly. It makes it much harder to access those left hemisphere functions associated with feeling competent, secure, and acting on goals effectively. If your system is perpetually primed for danger, simply telling yourself to think positive or just relax is often biochemically futile. The alarm system is stuck on. Recognizing that physiological bias is part of recognizing the pattern.
So we've got cognitive recognition, seeing the pattern intellectually. But you mentioned earlier, to heal that deeper inherited charge, the frozen residue in the body, we need something else, a different language.
We need the language of the body itself, sensation. This brings us to the concept of the felt sense.
The felt sense, what exactly is that?
The sources describe it as the essential pathway, maybe the only pathway, to consciously connect with the healing resources stored deep within the oldest part of our brain, the reptilian brain, the home of our core survival instincts.
And sensation is the language it speaks, not words.
Not words, not complex thoughts, just raw sensation, tingling, heat, cold, pressure, tightness, trembling, expansion, flow. That's the vocabulary of our instinctual core.
Okay, but if we're talking about potentially unfreezing traumatic energy, isn't directly focusing on body sensations risky? Can that just overwhelm you or re-traumatize you?
That is a critical point, and the absolute key here is the approach. It must be gentle, it must be slow, it should never be forced. There's a phrase used in this work that's vital. You will get there faster by going slower.
Faster by going slower. How does that work?
If you try to rush it, to force yourself to feel intense sensations or dig up overwhelming memories associated with the trauma, you absolutely risk flooding the nervous system and reinforcing the trauma response. The approach has to be titrated.
Titrated? Like in chemistry. Small doses.
Exactly like that. You gently bring awareness to a sensation in your body, maybe just for a moment. You just notice it. Tightness in my chest. And then crucially, you might shift your attention back to something neutral or pleasant. Your feet on the floor, the feeling of your breath. You dip a toe in, then pull back. You don't dive headfirst into the overwhelming part.
So the felt sense isn't about wallowing in the bad feelings.
Not at all. It's about developing the capacity to notice the present moment stream of physical sensations moving through your body without judgment and without getting overwhelmed. It's a way of gently re-engaging the body's natural processing system.
The system that got interrupted when the trauma happened or when the inherited pattern got locked in.
Precisely. It allows that interrupted instinctual process, the trembling released, the urge to run or push away that got frozen, to finally complete in small, manageable ways. It helps the nervous system discharge that stored energy safely.
And that transforms the energy.
It can. That trembling, for instance, which might feel like terrifying anxiety when it's stuck, can transform into a feeling of aliveness, of energy available to move towards life instead of being perpetually stuck running away from perceived threats.
That shift from being sort of lost in the difficult feeling to being able to relate to it from a safer place, that sounds like it connects really well to another approach mentioned in the sources, internal family systems, or IFS.
Yes, IFS fits beautifully here. It offers a really compassionate and practical map for working with these internal dynamics, including the parts of us that carry inherited burdens.
And the core idea of IFS is healing through what? Integration?
Healing as wholeness and reconnection. Restoring harmony and trust among the different parts of our internal system. It gives us a non-pathologizing way to understand things like that harsh inner critic.
Okay, let's make it concrete. Say someone listening makes a simple mistake, maybe at work or in a conversation, and suddenly they're flooded with shame. How would IFS understand that reaction, especially if it feels disproportionate, possibly inherited?
Okay, good example. So the mistake happens, the trigger. Instantly, an internal critic part jumps in. This critic might sound remarkably like a judgmental parent or grandparent. Its voice and attitude might be literally inherited.
What's the critic's job in the IFS model?
Its intention is protective, even if its methods are harsh. It's a type of manager part, trying desperately to prevent you from making mistakes that it believes will lead to rejection, humiliation, or abandonment fears, likely learned very early or even passed down.
So the critic yells internally, "You idiot, you always mess up," and then what?
That harsh criticism immediately activates another type of part called an exile. This is usually a younger, more vulnerable part of you that holds the original pain, the shame, the fear, the feeling of worthlessness associated with past experiences of criticism or failure.
And that exile surfacing is what causes the flood of shame.
Exactly. The exile gets triggered, its intense emotions wash over the system, and suddenly you become shame. It takes over. And shame loves secrecy, silence, hiding, which just keeps the whole painful cycle locked in place.
And our usual reaction is probably to fight the critic, right? Tell it to shut up.
Which, as IFS points out, often makes it louder. Because the critic feels it needs to be harsh to keep you safe from what the exile fears most. The breakthrough in IFS comes from a different approach. Learning to unblend from these parts. Realizing you are not the critic, you are not the ashamed exile. You are the self, the core of you that is naturally calm, curious, compassionate, confident, connected.
So from that self-energy, you can approach the parts differently.
Yes, instead of battling the critic, you might get curious about it. Appreciate its protective intention, even while acknowledging its impact is painful. Wow, you work so hard to try and keep me from getting hurt. Thank you for trying, but your methods are causing a lot of suffering.
That sounds radically different, approaching the critic with compassion.
It is. And by doing that, by acknowledging its positive intent, the critic often softens. It doesn't need to yell so loudly. This creates space for the self to connect with the wounded exile part, offering it the understanding, comfort, and validation it never received originally.
And that's how you start to change the internal dynamic, edit that inherited script.
Precisely. Healing the exile, updating the critic strategy. It allows your core self to lead your life, rather than being run by these reactive, often inherited, manager and exile parts. Your choices start coming from a place of inner security and wisdom, not old fear.
Okay, so we've mapped the territory. The body's potential freeze, the mind's inherited patterns like critics and attachment styles, and some tools for recognition like the felt sense and IFS. Now, let's talk about actionable pathways. How do we consciously step out of these inherited scripts and actually create lasting change, discharge that old energy?
One really powerful pathway emphasized in the sources is cultivating self-compassion. And importantly, it's presented not just as a nice idea, but as a practice, something you can actively learn and train.
Training the brain now.
Training the brain to respond to your own suffering, whether it's emotional pain, failure, inadequacy, with kindness and understanding, rather than the usual harsh self-criticism that many of us inherited.
So changing that default reaction from judgment to kindness.
Exactly. And self-compassion, as described in the research, isn't just one thing. It actually has two key facets, two different energies, almost.
Okay, what about they?
The first is probably what most people think of: tender self-compassion. This is about comforting ourselves, validating our pain. It's like being a warm, supportive friend to yourself when you're hurting, holding difficult emotions with love, acknowledging this is really hard right now without judgment.
That sounds crucial for healing those shamed exile parts we talked about with IFS.
Absolutely. It provides the safety and acceptance those parts need. But there's a second, equally important aspect.
Which is?
Fierce self-compassion. This is the more action-oriented side. Think of it as your inner mama bear energy.
Inner mama bear,
Yeah.
protecting yourself.
Yes. Fierce self-compassion is about protecting yourself. It involves saying no, setting clear boundaries, standing up to harm, motivating yourself to make necessary changes, even confronting injustice. It's the energy we need to take action to alleviate our suffering, not just passively accept it.
So it's not just being soft with yourself, it's also about having your own back. Strongly.
Precisely. We need both. We need the tenderness to soothe the wounds and the fierceness to protect ourselves and make changes. True self-compassion integrates both acceptance and action.
And what's fascinating is how practicing this, both tender and fierce, impacts our relationships, directly countering those insecure attachment patterns we might have inherited.
The ripple effect is significant. Research consistently shows that people high in self-compassion tend to be better relationship partners. Their partners describe them as warmer, more supportive, more accepting, less controlling, and more encouraging of autonomy.
That's interesting. You might think focusing on yourself would make you selfish.
It's the opposite, actually. Traditional self-esteem is often fragile, dependent on external success or validation. Self-compassion is more stable because it's available even when you fail. It fills your own emotional well, meaning you have more genuine warmth and acceptance available to offer others, rather than needing constant validation from them. It fosters more secure relating, breaking the cycle of inherited insecurity.
Wow. So healing that internal relationship with yourself directly translates to healthier external relationships. That's powerful. Okay, another pathway mentioned is about how we approach choices, moving from being passive pickers to more deliberate choosers.
Right. This taps into intentionality when we're feeling overwhelmed, anxious, maybe operating from that alarmist brain state.
We just grab the easiest option.
Often, yes, we become pickers. We just select from whatever options are immediately presented, often driven by a desire to just get the decision over with and reduce the anxiety of uncertainty. It's a reactive mode.
And a chooser, how is that different?
A chooser is more proactive, more reflective. They take the time, even if it's just a few moments, to consider what truly matters to them in this situation. What are their values? Their long-term goals? They might even try to modify the options or create new ones that align better with what's important.
It requires slowing down, being more conscious.
Exactly. It requires time and attention, which means we can't be choosers about everything. We have to prioritize, deliberate more on the big decisions, the ones that shape our lives, and maybe be quicker on the less important stuff. It's about focusing our energy where it counts.
And being more intentional like this is especially important when we think about regret, isn't it? Because the sources say our biggest regrets change over time.
They do dramatically. There's something called the omission bias in regret. In the short term, we tend to regret the things we did, the actions, the commissions that turned out badly. You know, making a bad investment, saying something hurtful. The sting is immediate.
Makes sense, but long term.
Long term, the pattern flips. When people look back over their lives, their deepest, most persistent regrets are almost always about the things they didn't do, the omissions.
Like what?
Missed opportunities, the relationship they didn't pursue, the educational path they were too afraid to take, the creative project they never started, the important conversations they avoided. Those roads not taken tend to haunt us more profoundly over the decades.
Why is that? Why do the duties weigh heavier in the long run?
Because actions, even bad ones, tend to get resolved or integrated somehow. We learn from them, we apologize, we move on. But omissions, they represent the potential self we failed to become. They're tied directly to our sense of identity and unmet potential. The psychological door on what might have been often feels like it never fully closes.
So if you've inherited a pattern of fear, of holding back, of acting in, instead of acting out or acting at all, that becomes the root of those future omissions, those lifelong regrets.
Precisely. Challenging that inherited fear, daring to take action even when it feels risky, becomes incredibly important not just for present happiness, but for building a life you won't look back on with deep if-onlys. It's a core part of rewriting that family script of inaction or avoidance.
It really brings things full circle.
Yeah.
Healing the past allows us to act differently in the present, shaping a different future. And this idea of transmitting patterns or changing them seems to come back to that foundational relationship.
Yes, Adler made that connection very strongly. He saw the therapist-client relationship, the process of change, as being fundamentally analogous to the mother's role.
Yeah, so
The mother's primary social task, in his view, is to interpret the world, society, cooperation, meaning to the child, to help the child find their place. If the mother, perhaps due to her own unresolved inherited issues, can't fulfill that role adequately.
the task falls to others later, like a therapist.
Exactly. But the therapist is at a disadvantage because they don't have that primal bond, that deep early influence. It underscores how profound those early relational blueprints are and how healing them within ourselves can potentially change the legacy we pass on.
So ultimately, doing this work, discharging the old energy, cultivating self-compassion, becoming a chooser, fostering secure attachment within ourselves, it doesn't just heal us, it potentially shifts the whole relational dynamic.
It really can. Think about that anxious avoidant dance we discussed. When both partners start healing their own inherited wounds, the dynamic naturally shifts towards more security. The anxious partner learns they can express needs without catastrophe and feels safer. The avoidant partner learns they can have closeness without being engulfed and feels safer too.
They move out of that reactive, insecure cycle driven by old fears.
Right. They step out of reenacting the inherited drama and start co-creating a new, more secure relational script.
Mm.
It's possible to build a relationship based on present reality, not just past ghosts.
Mm.
Hashtag outro. Thinking about all this, it really brings up a fascinating question, doesn't it? If these deep anxieties, these defensive patterns, were in some ways programmed into us biologically, psychologically, as survival strategies passed down from ancestors who faced real threats,
Yeah.
does healing them, resolving them, does that mean we're sort of, in a way, consciously editing our family story, changing the trajectory? We've touched on so much that physical residue of trauma in the body, the psychological blueprints of attachment, guilt, the inner critic.
And the tools available now, really listening to the body through the felt sense, understanding our inner world with models like IFS, actively practicing self-compassion.
All ways to essentially renegotiate these inherited patterns.
So what's the big takeaway here? I think, for me, it's the shift away from self-blame. Understanding that these patterns often aren't a sign of personal failure, but might be a biological echo, a psychological inheritance that's incredibly liberating.
It is. It reframes the struggle.
And it gives you agency. It means you have the potential, maybe even the responsibility, to become the first person in your line, to consciously work through and discharge some of that frozen energy, to stop the cycle of avoidance or reactivity, to intentionally choose and write a new emotional script, not just for yourself, but maybe for generations to come.
That really is a powerful idea to sit with.
It is. So our encouragement to you listening is simply to be gentle with yourselves as you explore this territory. Notice your own felt sense. Get curious about those recurring patterns or internalized voices.
Remember faster by going slower.
Exactly. Be curious, not judgmental. And keep in mind that healing, in this context, really means reconnection, connecting more deeply and compassionately with all parts of yourself, and through that, connecting more authentically with the world and the people around you.